Welcome everybody to Science Division Live. My name is Jose Zuniga and I'm one of the science educators here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science. It is my sincere pleasure to introduce to you Ryan Jones, a PhD student who is studying arachnology with us here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science, studying those spiders. And he's got an excellent presentation for you today, in which we'll have some time to answer your questions in the comments after that presentation is done. So without further ado, Ryan, take it away.
All right, thank you. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. Like I said, I'm Ryan. I'm a PhD student that is studying the arachnology lab at DMNS, and I'm here to talk to you a little bit about spiders. And that's because maybe those of you who are joining us may have a fear of spiders, or probably know someone who does have a fear of spiders. And I want to maybe get you to fear them less and maybe appreciate them more. So I want to talk about some of the benefits that you get, both directly and indirectly. The first of which, of course, is that the most obvious benefit that you get is that they eat things, insects that you don't enjoy and you'd rather not have in your home. So this includes all manner of biting, stinging, pinching, clawing insects, as well as other spiders that may invade your home, your business, where you sleep. So whenever you see a spider that's making a little web in the corner, I always say, hello, can I get you anything? Keep up the good work. I think I can't overstate how effective they are at trying to control the pest population because they kill somewhere between 408 million metric tons of prey each year. And keep in mind that a metric ton is over 2,200 pounds, which comes out to about 2.4 billion pounds of insects a day, right? And also equivalent to about the entire weight of the entire human population on Earth within a year, right? So it's really impressive. Obviously, you don't want all those insects in your face, stinging, biting, pinching you. So that's the first and most direct benefit that you get from the presence of spiders. Second of which, some of you gardening enthusiasts might understand what these small green critters are here in this linophiid web. Those would be aphids. So if you have a garden at home, you might be plagued by aphids, which suck the sap out of your plants. And spiders are known to be a fairly good control against aphids. And they work as biocontrol agents. When I say biocontrol agents, I mean that they are natural predators of things that are pests to our crops and our house plants. And so we would use spiders as a means to reduce populations of those pests. So with the introduction and the enhancement of spider populations in agricultural fields, we can allow for really effective suppression of pests while also reducing pesticide usage, right? So if you are a fan of organic foods, the use of spiders would absolutely help in reducing our amount of pesticide use. Having a robust and diverse spider population is a very well-known way to reduce pest damage to crops and increase productivity and yield. And there's also been documented use of spiders as biocontrol agents as far back as 2,000 years ago in China, as spiders are especially effective in controlling pests of rice fields. You can also thank the success of apple orchards and avocado plantations in the US, Canada, Mexico, Israel, and Europe on spider programs that allow for effective pest management. Just to kind of give some empirical data on that, a meta-analysis, which is an analysis that summarizes the findings of many different studies, found that there was a very incredible direct and strong relationship between the presence of spiders, pest suppression, and increase in crop performance and yield. Right, so if you see this dark black line that goes straight up, this indicates that as pests are suppressed, there is a strong and direct effect on the increase of crop yield and performance. Also, importance is their desired effect on disease vector insects. So things like mosquitoes, which transmit diseases such as Zika, Lyme disease, dengue, malaria, yellow fever, just to name a few. So this is something that's a relatively new trend. So countries in Africa and Asia that have a incredible mosquito problem that transmit these diseases and also don't have the infrastructure necessarily prevent lots of mosquitoes from occurring, they are introducing huge spider populations to try to suppress mosquito and pest disease populations, so they can then in turn reduce the amount of their society that is affected by Lyme disease, dengue, malaria, Zika, and yellow fever. Obviously, those are very tangible societal health benefits. The last direct benefit that you'll get is ecosystem health. So I'm going to use an analog here. Many of you might be familiar with the famous example of wolves' effect on Yellowstone habitats. So wolves were extinct from Yellowstone since European colonizers pretty much wiped them out in the 18 and 1900s. And they were reintroduced in the 1990s. And that in turn caused a reduction in elk populations, which then reduced the amount of vegetation that was being grazed. And that in turn caused these new habitat structures to form. So you can see on the picture on the left, right, this is pre-wolf, this is an overgrazed habitat. On the right, after wolves have been introduced, right, they've reduced the amount of grazing the elk do, and that has in turn caused a more structurally sound habitat. You can see that picture on the left, more flood prone. Picture on the right, a lot more less flood prone. And this effect can also be seen in spiders. So in a controlled study in prairie grass in Kansas, a team of researchers tried to eliminate all herbivorous insects and their predators from a particular plot of prairie land. What happens is that a particular tall grass ended up being incredibly dominant over the much shorter other diverse species. So we had basically a plot of land that became dominated by one particular species of tall grass. After they reintroduced a herbivore, in this case a grasshopper, we saw a predation or consumption of this tall grass, which allowed for some of the smaller, less abundant plants to rebound a little bit. But these grasshoppers also ate those other less abundant plants as well. So we did see a small increase in plant species and diversity, but the greatest increase in plant species and diversity was when a predator was introduced. So when this wolf spider was reintroduced to this prairie plot, it reduced the abundance of this grasshopper and other herbivorous insects, which then in turn allowed for even more plant species to flourish, right? So if you care about having a incredibly diverse and robust ecosystem, right, you care about the presence of spiders as they are top predators and really mitigate the effects of overeating from herbivorous insects. So to summarize the direct benefits that you get, they suppress and eliminate insects inside of your home and your business's place where you work and live. They increase crop productivity and food production by eliminating pest species that otherwise would cost billions of dollars in damages. There's an estimate by the UN that about a fifth of the world's crops are destroyed by herbivorous insects. Obviously, having a robust spider population can help reduce that. They also suppress and eliminate disease vector insects, so things like mosquitoes, ticks, things that would transmit diseases to us and other animals. And lastly, they act as important components of the food chain. So they are important food items for both amphibians, lizards, mammals, birds. So all those things help or are promoted and thrive because spiders are so abundant and are able to be utilized as a food resource for those animals as well. So lastly, talk about some indirect effects or benefits for you. The first we'll talk about is biomimetic materials. Biomimetic materials are materials that try to replicate naturally produced materials, such as spider silk. Spider silk is one material that is highly researched because it's one of the strongest and toughest materials on the planet that we know of. This spider on the right is the Darwin's bark spider, and it produces the strongest silk that we know of, and is thought to be over 10 times the strength of Kevlar. And Kevlar is what goes into making body armor for things like people like troops, military presence, and policemen. So if we can mass produce spider silk, we can make very lightweight, flexible, inexpensive body armor that can keep people safe, and it will be also cheap to produce. We can also reinforce spider silk with man-made materials such as graphene or carbon nanotubes, which can make incredibly lightweight and inexpensive building materials as well. So spider silk is naturally stronger than steel of the same diameter, so it has to be a weight by weight comparison, but it's also more flexible and elastic. So of course, like being flexible and elastic is not necessarily a great thing when you're trying to construct buildings, but if we can learn to stiffen it up by using graphene and carbon nanotubes, this would mean we have an incredibly strong, incredibly resilient, also cheap way to build buildings in the future. Silk is also incredibly, or could be incredibly useful in medicine as well. So during the secretion of spider silk in web building, there are some latent antibiotic components, meaning that bacteria and fungi might not be able to grow on spider webs. Scientists can also enhance this by bioengineering spiders or directly chemically manipulating the webs themselves to be really incredibly antibiotic efficient bandages. So imagine a future in which we don't have to orally prescribe antibiotic drugs. We can simply put a bandage that consists of spider silk. It's biodegradable and protein based, goes right on and administers antibiotic directly into your wound. And so that would reduce our dependency on orally taken antibiotic prescriptions. Venom is also a novel and a developing field in medicine development. So spider venom can be extracted and engineered for a variety of medicinal uses, which could include treatments for cancer, cardiovascular disorders, inflammation, and also pain relief. This is something that is relatively new. But the last study here, although that title there, manipulation of a spider peptide toxin alters so on and so forth, seems extremely obscure. The main line of that study is that they found a potential replacement for opioids through tarantula venom. So it'd be great if we can get pain relief that's as effective as morphine or say something like Oxycontin without the addictive effects that are ravaging some components of our society. Lastly, to summarize, another benefit you might get, or at least half of our population, this is a Brazilian wandering spider, which is one species of medical concern. So the venom of the spider causes long engorgement of a certain part of the male anatomy, which could lead to effective treatment for certain male dysfunction if we can learn to effectively produce and harvest this toxin. So with that, thank you for listening. I would like to end by saying that there are over 49,000 known species of spider, and a very, very small fraction, less than 1% of those spiders are of any medical concern to you. So please, when you see a spider, don't be alarmed, thank it, and wish it well on its way. And I'm happy to take any questions.
I've learned so much about spiders in the last 10 minutes I never thought about before. Thank you, Tim. Not Tim, Ryan, for that wonderful presentation there. Yeah, that's pretty fascinating. I never thought, I of course have heard about spider silk being used as a construction material, but I didn't think about the potential medical applications of venom. And then of course, I have aphids all over my flowers. They drive me crazy. So I do always enjoy seeing a spider there in my garden. We have some questions coming in. And if you folks out there have questions for our expert, you can post them into the comments and we'll use this next 15 minutes to answer as many of your questions as we can. We already have a few questions that have come in from Facebook. Daniel wanted to know, are all the spiders that you showed in your presentation from Colorado?
No, most of them would not be. This jumping spider I showed at the end would be what, maybe we can reshare that. Where'd the scare screen go? There's a fairly common jumping spider. This is something you might find in Colorado. But no, many of the spiders I showed are not present in Colorado, but some of their close relatives could be found in Colorado. Good question.
Great question. And then we had another question from Chris, who said that they're from Colorado now, they live in Texas, and in the morning they see a lot of spider webs. How, as a scientist who studies spiders, how do you figure out how many spiders are in a certain area? how do you figure out the population of a species of spider?
That's also a great question. So typically what scientists will do is they will use like something like tape to cordon off, say, several hundred square meters or several dozen meters, something that's manageable, and they will use a spider survey. So they will use a variety of techniques to collect spiders, and they will use models, depending on how many spiders they get, use models to try to predict, okay, we have this many spiders that we're able to find. That means there's certainly a lot more that we didn't find. So it has to do with some sophisticated modeling that I myself am not super qualified to dive into the mathematical portion of that. But that is something that is extremely sophisticated.
Interesting. I mean, you never think about counting the number of insects, but that could be very relevant to a lot of different types of science. And I guess I should correct myself and say the spiders are not insects, they are arachnids. Woof,
True.
woof, almost stepped into it right there. Now, I know a lot of people are afraid of spiders. There's a lot of phobia of spiders, with arachnophobia, and a lot of people, even if they're not necessarily terrified of spiders, are unhappy to see spiders in their home. When we do find spiders in our house, where are the most likely places that we'll find them? And then what are the best ways to not squish them and ensure that they can help us out, but also not have us be scared to get into the tub?
Sure, you'll probably most likely find a spider in, say, a basement or a garage or a crawl space. Many houses that have a basement might have something like a black widow in their basement. Obviously, if you encounter a black widow, you want to have some caution when dealing with it. That being said, right, black widow envenomation is not lethal unless you are already extremely unhealthy, you are already infirm already. In terms of dealing with spiders, you can get, say, a cup and some paper towel and just gently try to usher the spider into that cup and cover it. Spiders, they don't perceive threats unless you essentially squish them, right? They don't feel pressure, then they're not going to bite, generally speaking. Especially spiders in North America generally aren't aggressive. There are some in Australia that are aggressive. So you should be safe as long as you're not trying to squish them. They won't bite you. They don't even really perceive you as a threat. Their eyesight is so poor that they might see you as a big blobby shadow. So they won't try to bite you if you try to escort them out of your house.
I mean, I could see how a spider would think I'm a big blobby shadow. I'm on a diet now, so hopefully I'll be a slimmer blobby shadow in the future to those spiders. But do you have a favorite species of spider?
It's a good question. So mea culpa here, I study a separate group of arachnids called camel spiders. And despite being called camel spiders, they're not spiders at all. They are cousins to spiders. So although those are my study group, I don't have a particular favorite. I don't like to play favorites. I would say that a favorite species name would be Phidippus audax, because that just rolls off the tongue. That's a bull jumper. You'll find them all over the United States, including here in Colorado. So I just, like, if I need a password for something, I'll just write Phidippus with some random numbers.
Well, you better change those passwords now, because now we all know.
Well, I mean, it's a good hit for your audience, right? If you just need a quick password for something, use a spider name.
I bet they'd make great band names as well.
That's a good idea.
I have a question for you. They're called camel spiders, but they're not spiders. Can you elaborate on that a little bit?
Sure. So they're members of the order Sulfugii, which is one of the 12 existing orders of arachnids. They don't spin webs, they don't produce silk at all. They have really large jaws. And so they use those jaws, they chase down their prey, and they just use those jaws to mince up their prey into a pulp and then essentially drink them up. They generally live in desert environments throughout the world. You can find them here in Denver. They are very small. They are of no medical concern. As far as we know, there's no venom in any camel spider species. And their bite would feel like, say you have a clothespin on your finger, right? This little tiny little pinch. That being said, if you go to the Middle East or Africa, they too tend to get kind of scarily big. and they are very quick. And they are also dominant predators within desert ecosystems. So they are voracious, they eat a lot, and they also help with maintaining insect populations in desert environments.
Yeah, and you had spoken about the importance of predators in an ecosystem. I think for so much of our history, we have removed predators from the ecosystems that we've shared with them. I think now we're starting to understand that they are as necessary to the ecosystem as the other more cuddly animals that we are accustomed to.
Absolutely.
We hear a lot of spooky spider stories. Oh, I had a friend of a friend who was bitten by a such and such, and now they'll never wake up again. What's your experience when you encounter those types of stories on the internet or from friends or family? How do you respond?
That's very common. Pretty much the first thing that comes out of someone's mouth when I tell them I study arachnids is, oh, I know someone who was bit by a brown recluse or something like that. Brown recluse bites, black widow bites, and many spider bites do get a bad rap. Brown recluse in particular there's a lot of mythology around it. They're fairly poorly understood by the public, and that's not helped at all by the fact that the media likes to make really sensational headlines whenever someone thinks they've been bitten by a brown recluse. So there's actually one researcher, Dr. Rick Vedder, who has spent his whole career trying to debunk this mythology on the brown recluse. The fact that doctors often misdiagnose wounds as brown recluse bites. And if you've seen media headlines, you know that brown recluse bites cause like skin lesions. 9 times out of 10, those are going to be extremely mild. You can put a Band-Aid on it, you'll be fine. The 1 out of 10 case, if that, will be you didn't take care of it, it got infected, it turned into a worse problem, and it's really the bacterial infection that hurts and not the spider venom itself. Right. That being said, I encourage anyone listening to look into Rick Vedder's work. He is one of his most notable publications is that one family caught several hundred brown recluse spiders in their home, and they used sticky traps and found that the family has been living with over 6,000 brown recluse. They were never bitten once in the entire study period, right? They avoid you just as much as you want to avoid them. They're not aggressive. And also brown recluse don't live in Colorado naturally. That being said, they can hitchhike their way here, but they don't live at elevation, so they do die. They can't establish populations. So I always encourage, just as you would with anything, check facts yourself. Look for primary research, people who are producing the data, people who are experts in the field, and don't necessarily read the headline that man loses leg to spider bite type of thing.
That's good to know. I mean, 6,000 brown recluses, I was going to have nightmares, but then they were bit once, so nightmares averted. I have one final question for you, Ryan, before we wrap up this Science Division Live. What has been the most surprising thing that you have discovered during your time with us here at the Denver Museum of Nature and Science?
So I just completed my master's degree in at University of Colorado, Denver, while working at the M&S this past December. And I suppose coming into working at the museum, I have been, maybe naive would be the right word, on how we understand the biological world and how we communicate biological concepts to people. And one thing that comes up to mind is how we name species, right? Species is everything that looks like this is considered a species and is named this. And one thing that it looks like that is something else, right? And thus may seem like it's a really sound system that is fairly easy and straightforward, but in my working with camel spiders especially, it's sometimes very, very difficult to try to figure out what is what in a biological sense, and species may be gradations of each other and share features that make it really hard to distinguish them apart. So that itself has been really eye-opening, and how difficult it is to try to figure out just how many different organisms do we share the planet with. it's very hard to do that.
Yeah, I could see that being very challenging. And I know that a lot of those systems that we use for naming species and a lot of that convention were born out of things that were started centuries ago. And of course, the world changes and times change. You know, we have an understanding of genetics that Linnaeus would have, you know, given his right on for.
Right, right.
So, you know, these systems have to adapt and grow and change. And so I'm glad that you're with us here at the museum and doing your research. I hope you learn lots. I hope we're able to help you get that PhD. Hopefully next time you join us, we'll be able to say Dr. Ryan Jones.
Maybe 3 or 4 years. Well, we'll see.
3 or 4 years. Well, you know, well, stick around. I've been here for 11, so you never know, right? But thank you so much for that presentation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Ryan. And
Thank you.
all of you out there so much for tuning in for Science Division Live today. We hope you learned a little bit. We hope you had a lot of fun. And we hope to see you again. Goodbye, everybody. Thank you so much for joining.
Thank you.